My name is Raymond Kemper. I'm 76 years old, and most mornings I wake up to silence. Not peaceful silence. The heavy, slow kind, the kind that settles around your chest and reminds you of everything that's missing. My wife, Lorraine, used to fill the house with sounds before I even opened my eyes. She would hum to herself while preparing breakfast, sometimes listening to the local news on that ancient radio she refused to replace, and every now and then I'd hear the low bark of laughter when something particularly absurd came on. We were married for 51 years, and then, one February morning, her heart gave out while she was watering the orchids in the kitchen window. I found her still holding the little plastic spray bottle. She was already gone. After that, time stopped meaning what it used to. Days blend. Mornings feel the same. You don't count Sundays anymore. Retirement didn't scare me. I used to work as a machinist, 39 years at the same factory, and I had plans when I stopped working. But nothing in this world prepares you for the way grief turns time into a slow-motion echo. For the first year after Lorraine died, I kept everything exactly the same. Her slippers by the bed, her robe on the hook behind the door, her teacup in the cabinet with the chip on the handle. I even kept buying the brand of yogurt she liked, knowing I wouldn't eat it. I just couldn't stop. I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the same modest single-story home we bought in 1971. The neighbors have changed. The trees we planted out back are now tall and brittle with age. The street used to be filled with laughter and barbecue smoke and kids playing tag on the sidewalk. Now it's mostly silence, save for the occasional leaf blower or a delivery truck rumbling by. I get by. I have my Social Security, a bit of pension, and the house is paid off. But it's not the finances that wear you down. It's the shrinking world. It's how the phone stops ringing, how invitations stop coming, how you begin to question whether you're still part of anything that matters. My son, Teddy, moved in with me 2 years ago. That sentence used to bring me some small measure of comfort. Back when I thought he came out of concern, to keep me company, to help me if I fell or forgot a burner on. But over time, I came to understand that it wasn't about me at all. Teddy's life had unraveled. He'd been laid off from a delivery job, bounced between couch surfing and motel rooms, estranged from his ex-wife and barely in contact with his own daughter. He said moving in would be temporary, just until he figured things out. That was 27 months ago. At first, I told myself it was good to have company. He helped mow the lawn and fix the garbage disposal. He brought in the groceries, made coffee in the morning. We even watched old baseball games together, but little by little, the routine changed. Teddy stopped going outside. The lawn drew ragged. He took over the basement and turned it into his lair, a mattress on the floor, a glowing computer monitor, half-eaten takeout containers stacked like sandbags along the walls. He slept all day, prowled the house at night, smoked weed in the garage even though I told him I didn't want the smell inside. He dismissed it with a wave. Relax, Pop. It's legal now. He didn't pay rent, didn't buy food. Every time I brought it up, he'd get defensive. You want me to go out there and flip burgers? At my age? He's 43. But in many ways, he feels much younger. Not in spirit, but in irresponsibility. The worst part wasn't his laziness. It was the way he began to talk to me. Like I was a burden, like I was the one freeloading in my own home. You don't need all these rooms, he'd say, walking through the hallway like a landlord inspecting his own property. You should consider downsizing. Get a condo in one of those assisted living places. They got bingo, nurses, meals. You'd love it. I told myself he was just frustrated, that he was going through a rough patch. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't temporary. This was decay, of his ambition, of our relationship, of any hope that things might change. There were nights I sat in my recliner and stared at the blank television, trying to remember the last real conversation we had. Not about bills or groceries or him asking for money. A real conversation where I saw my son as I once knew him, a curious, bright-eyed boy who loved trains and used to call me his hero. I couldn't remember. Physically, I'm not what I used to be. I take 7 different prescriptions every day. 2 for blood pressure, 1 for cholesterol, 2 for type 2 diabetes, and 1 mild antidepressant my doctor suggested after Lorraine died. They make me groggy sometimes, but they keep me on my feet. I organize them by day, keep a meticulous pill box, refill them monthly through the local pharmacy. I even set reminders on my flip phone. It's my small form of control in a life where everything else feels increasingly fragile. Recently, I noticed things were off. I went to take my morning meds, and one of the compartments was empty, earlier than it should have been. At first, I chalked it up to absent-mindedness. I double-checked my pill schedule, recounted the tablets, but it happened again the next week, and then again. I began to keep a small ledger, writing down every pill I took and when, and still I was running short. It wasn't much at first. A missing metformin here, a few lisinopril tablets there, but the pattern was clear. I asked Teddy about it one evening. We were in the kitchen. He was finishing off the last of my peanut butter and had his headphones on, one ear dangling. I told him I thought someone was tampering with my medications. His face didn't even flicker. He shrugged and said, "You probably forgot. You're getting older, Pop. That's what happens." And then he left the room, muttering something about paranoia. But I wasn't paranoid. I knew my routines, knew the exact click of the cabinet, the way each pill felt in my palm. I began hiding my pill organizer in different places. Behind the cereal boxes, inside my sock drawer, even once taped inside the underside of a dining room chair. It didn't matter. Somehow pills still went missing. I started feeling tired, dizzy, like I was underwater. There were mornings I'd wake up soaked in sweat, gasping. I thought about calling my doctor, but what would I say? That my own son was stealing my prescriptions? And then, a week ago, my neighbor Sheila, a sharp widow in her early 60s who walks her dog past my house every morning, casually mentioned she'd seen Teddy conducting business in the driveway with some stranger. She said it jokingly, smiling, but something about it lodged in my chest like a nail. I thanked her and pretended to laugh it off, but when I got back inside, my hands were shaking. That night, I waited until Teddy had gone down to the basement. I walked into the garage and turned on the light. Hidden under an old tarp in the corner were a few padded envelopes, the kind the pharmacy uses when delivering medications by mail. One was half torn open. Inside was a bottle of my blood pressure meds. My name scratched out with black marker. It was like being punched in the gut. My son, my only child, wasn't just taking my medicine. He was selling it. And I think that's when something inside me finally cracked. The morning it all changed was a quiet one, like most. I had slept poorly. There was a strange pounding in my temples all night, the kind of pressure that made it feel like something inside me was slowly trying to burst out. When I finally got up, the light in the kitchen felt too sharp. I moved slowly, my body heavy, and reached for the orange pill box that I always kept tucked behind the cereal. It wasn't there, not in the pantry, not in the cabinet, not in the sock drawer. I searched all the usual places, even the absurd ones. Inside the sugar container, under the mattress, behind the washer, with a growing sense of panic. I could feel my heartbeat rising, but not in the healthy, excited way. This was different. Erratic, loud in my ears, like it was knocking from the inside. I finally found the pill box in the linen closet, stuffed between folded towels. That wasn't where I'd left it. I knew that with absolute certainty. And when I opened it, it was nearly empty. Entire days of pills were missing. Not just one compartment. 4 or 5 in a row. Gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, box in hand, and tried to steady my breathing. I was supposed to have enough medication to last until Friday. It was Tuesday. I couldn't go without. Not for 3 days. Not at my age. Not with my conditions. I'd made that mistake once before, shortly after Lorraine died, when I forgot to reorder and thought I could stretch a few pills out. That ended with me in an ambulance, vomiting in a plastic bag, while some EMT checked my pulse and asked if I lived alone. I couldn't let that happen again. I picked up the phone and called the pharmacy. A recorded voice greeted me, followed by the familiar hold music, that tinny version of Claire de Lune they always played. When I finally got a human voice, I explained the situation. That I'd misplaced some medication and needed an emergency refill. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kemper," the pharmacist said, her tone polite but firm. "Your insurance only allows 1 fill per 30 days. The system won't let me override that. You'll need to speak with your doctor for an emergency override." My doctor, of course, wasn't available. He was on vacation, the receptionist told me cheerfully, and the covering physician didn't feel comfortable approving an early refill without a medical consultation. I hung up the phone feeling like a sinkhole had opened beneath me. The system was airtight. The rules were made for safety, they said. To prevent abuse, to prevent hoarding, to prevent theft. But no one thought about someone like me, a man whose only error was trusting his own son. I spent the next hours drifting between rooms, my body sluggish, my thoughts jumbled. I drank water, tried to rest, even considered going to the ER. But the shame stopped me. What would I say? That my son had stolen my pills and now I was spiraling toward another crisis? I could already picture the nurse's face. The pity, the professional detachment, the quiet note in the system labeling me elderly, unstable support network. By mid-afternoon, the headache had become a roar. My joints ached, my vision blurred slightly. I leaned on furniture as I moved, keeping one hand on the wall at all times. I tried calling Teddy. His phone went straight to voicemail. I texted, "We need to talk. Urgent." No reply. I went down to the basement, knocked once, then pushed the door open. It smelled like sweat and spoiled takeout. His computer screen glowed in the dark. A chat window open, columns of listings, usernames, order confirmations. I didn't understand all of it, but I saw enough. One tab had the name of one of my prescriptions, a specific dosage, even the bottle count. I stared at it, then at the stack of shipping envelopes in the corner. Teddy was asleep, earbuds still in, a half-empty beer can resting on his chest. I didn't wake him. I stood there, trembling, the scene fixing itself in my mind. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was fact. My son was selling my medication, my blood pressure pills, my insulin, the pills I needed to stay alive. He was trading them for cash or cryptocurrency or whatever pathetic form of currency people used on these dark platforms. And what killed me, what absolutely hollowed me out, was that he didn't even care enough to hide it properly. It wasn't shameful to him. It was just business. I went upstairs, called Sheila, my neighbor. I asked if she could drive me to the clinic. I didn't trust myself behind the wheel. The dizziness was worsening. Sheila came within 10 minutes, her little terrier yapping at my side while she helped me into the passenger seat. She didn't ask questions, just gave me that knowing glance, the kind women give when they suspect something's off and are just waiting for confirmation. At the clinic, I was taken in immediately. The nurse took one look at me and called in the attending. My blood pressure was 198 over 105. Dangerously high. I was nauseated, sweating through my shirt. They gave me medication through an IV, ran tests, asked me all the questions. I didn't tell them everything. Just enough. I said I had missed doses, that I lived with a relative, that I'd lost track. The doctor, a kind woman in her 40s, looked at me with concern, but didn't press. They kept me for observation. I stayed overnight, hooked to machines, listening to the rhythmic beeps like a metronome for all the things I'd done wrong. I thought about Lorraine, how she would have handled this. She would have confronted Teddy the minute the first pill went missing. She wouldn't have let it get this far. But then again, he never would have dared with her around. He knew better. He always feared her quiet disappointment more than my temper. When I was released the next morning, the doctor handed me a printout, a new prescription, a recommendation to see a specialist, a warning about elevated glucose levels, and a kind note about counseling services for seniors experiencing familial stress. I folded it into my jacket pocket and walked out into the grey morning. Sheila was waiting for me. I asked her to take me to the police station. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the front desk officer gave me that look, the tired, overworked expression of a man who's heard every variety of family betrayal. I explained, slowly, carefully, that I believed my son had been stealing and reselling my prescriptions, that I had proof, the envelopes, the computer. I offered to bring them in. He nodded, took notes, gave me a case number, said a detective would follow up. But I saw it in his eyes. Resignation. He'd seen it before. Sons stealing from fathers, daughters emptying bank accounts, grandkids forging signatures. He wasn't surprised, just tired, and somehow that hurt even more than outrage would have. When I got home, Teddy was still asleep. I didn't say a word. I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the closed toilet lid with my head in my hands. Something had changed. Not just in him, but in me. A switch had flipped. This wasn't about a rough patch anymore. This wasn't about helping him get back on his feet. My son had endangered my life for profit. That was a truth I could no longer ignore. And the question I now faced wasn't what I would do about him. It was whether I would ever be able to forgive myself for letting it happen. When I got back from the police station that day, a cold stillness seemed to settle over the house. It wasn't the usual quiet of an aging man's routine. No, this was heavier, almost sentient, like the walls themselves had absorbed the truth I'd spoken aloud for the first time. I didn't even take off my coat. I walked straight into the kitchen and opened every cabinet, one by one, methodically. I went through the pantry, under the sink, behind the freezer drawers. I found empty prescription bottles shoved in a grocery bag under the recycling bin. My name still faintly visible through the black marker. Some were completely stripped of labels, others still had the pharmacy's warning stickers partially peeled. My hand trembled as I counted the bottles. 8, at least. Not all from this month. Some were from earlier, even ones I thought I had taken, doses I had assumed I had used. The full scale of it began to form in my mind like a bruise rising to the surface. Teddy came upstairs that evening, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair a mess of curls and sweat. He was wearing one of my old sweatshirts, stretched out, stained, sleeves cut at the wrists. He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a beer without a word, and sat at the table as if everything were normal. I stood across from him and said his name. He didn't look up at first, just stared into the open bottle. "I need to talk to you," I said again. He raised his eyes, slowly, irritation flickering across his face. "What now?" "I went to the clinic yesterday. My blood pressure was nearly 200. I was one step from a stroke, Teddy." A slow blink, then a shrug. "You've got high blood pressure. That's not news." I swallowed hard. "You've been stealing my meds." "Selling them." That did it. The flicker turned into something more vivid. A flash of defensive anger, of wounded pride. What the hell are you talking about? I found the envelopes in the garage. I saw your computer. I saw the listings. His jaw tightened. You were snooping in my stuff. You were selling the medication that keeps me alive. That's a hell of an accusation to make without proof. I have proof. I showed it to the police. He stood up so suddenly the chair legs screeched across the floor. You called the cops on me. I did, I said, and I'd do it again. For a moment, I thought he might strike me, his fists clenched at his sides, eyes wide, body trembling. But then something else took over. Something colder. He stepped back, laughed bitterly, and said, You're out of your damn mind, old man. You're confused. Probably forgot you took those pills. That's what happens when your brain starts to go. I remember everything. Do you? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You remember where you parked last week? You remember what day it is today? What year it is? I'm not senile, Teddy. No, he said slowly, cruelly. You're just paranoid. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, stomping down the stairs to the basement. I stood there for a long time after he left, breathing hard, feeling my ribs tremble with each shallow breath. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but all I could do was lean on the counter and let the silence wrap itself around me again. The next morning, the tension still hadn't lifted. I woke up groggy, unsteady, with a metallic taste in my mouth. I took what little medication I had left, carefully rationing the doses, and tried to act as though the walls hadn't just collapsed. Teddy didn't come upstairs that day. I didn't hear the creak of his footsteps, the flick of the microwave, the slam of the back door. But I knew he was still there. His car was parked out front. The Wi-Fi router blinked steadily, and I could hear faint bass beats echoing from below in the quiet moments between my thoughts. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened it, there stood a tall, heavy-set man in a navy polo shirt, clipboard in hand. Raymond Kemper. Yes? Hear about the equipment order, he said without looking up. Blood glucose meters, case of 60. My stomach dropped. I didn't order that. He squinted. Says right here, online order, paid in crypto, delivery to this address, under your name, signature required. I didn't order anything. Do you want to refuse delivery? Yes. Take it back. He looked annoyed but nodded, scribbled something and returned to the truck. I closed the door, locking both bolts this time. I stood there with my back against it, mind racing. He was using my name, my identity, and not just for stealing pills, for a full operation. He'd taken this as far as it could go. My home address was now a point of contact for illegal shipments. If the police came back, and they would, I might not be seen as a victim anymore. I might be seen as complicit. I went to the basement door and knocked. No answer. I opened it and descended slowly, one hand on the rail. The room was dark, save for the blue glow of the computer monitor. Teddy was there, slumped in the chair, headphones off this time, eyes closed. A pizza box was on the floor, a glass of amber liquid, not beer, rested precariously on the edge of the desk. Teddy. He didn't move. Teddy, I said louder. His eyes opened, sluggishly. He looked at me as though it took effort to focus. You had a package delivered in my name, I said. He groaned. So? That's identity fraud. It's a felony. You're being dramatic. I'm going to ask you one more time. Stop. Stop all of it. Get out of this house. If you don't leave by Friday, I'm changing the locks. He stood slowly, unsteady. You're gonna throw me out. Your own son. I've given you 2 years. You endangered my life. I'm done. You can't survive without me, you old bastard. He took a step toward me, and I took one back. His breath was sour, his eyes red. You forget to eat half the time, he sneered. You forget the stove on. Who's going to look after you when you fall again, huh? Sheila with her little dog? I'd rather die alone than let you help me again. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You already are dying, Pop. Look at you. And then he muttered something I'll never forget. You think anyone's going to believe you? You think you're going to go to the cops and they're going to care? They'll say you're just a confused old man who misplaced his pills. And when I show them that I've got power of attorney, who do you think they'll believe? That stopped me cold. What? He smirked. You remember those forms I had you sign last year? Said it was for the bank? You didn't even read them. My knees nearly gave out. You forged. No, he interrupted, matter of fact. You signed, just didn't pay attention. I went upstairs in silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights off, the pill bottle clutched in my hand, and realized something I should have known long ago. My son was no longer just a troubled man. He was a predator, and I was prey. The breakdown, when it came, wasn't cinematic or loud. It was quiet, clinical, and deeply humiliating. I woke up on the floor of the hallway, my left cheek pressed against the cold tile, one slipper still on, the other lost somewhere between the bedroom and the kitchen. My head throbbed, and there was a warm, sticky wetness at the back of my skull. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to stain the collar of my shirt. I didn't know how long I'd been down. An hour, maybe more. I had no memory of falling. The last thing I recalled was reaching for the sink to refill my water bottle. After that, nothing. I tried to sit up, but my vision swam and something behind my ribs screamed with pain. I stayed there, frozen, waiting for the world to stabilize. It never did. Finally, I called out. Not loudly, just a single word, hoarse and low. Teddy. No answer. Teddy. Again, this time louder. Still nothing. I could hear movement downstairs, faint music, the low hum of voices from his headset. He was awake. He simply chose not to come. I reached for my phone. It wasn't in my pocket. I scanned the hallway from the floor, my neck stiff, and finally spotted it under a side table a few feet away. I tried crawling. My arms shook with the effort, and when I finally got the phone, the screen was cracked. Still functional. I dialed Sheila. She answered on the second ring. Raymond. I fell, I whispered. I'm hurt. Please. She was there in minutes. I don't know how she got in. Maybe the spare key I'd given her years ago. I remember her voice calling my name, the warmth of her hand on my back, the clatter of her keys as she dialed 911. The paramedics came. I was taken to the ER. CT scan, X-rays, blood work, concussion, bruised ribs, dehydration. The attending physician, a severe woman with sharp eyes, asked if there was anyone at home to help me. I told her my son lived downstairs. He didn't hear you fall. No, I said. He was busy. She looked at me for a long moment, then made a note in my chart. That night I lay in a hospital bed under sterile light, listening to the beeping machines and the rhythmic shuffle of nurses' feet in the hallway. I thought about Lorraine, how she used to hover when I was ill, her worry manifesting in folded laundry and bowls of broth. I thought about the time I sprained my ankle in '93 and Teddy, then a teenager, had brought me ice packs and asked if I needed help to the bathroom. I wondered when he stopped caring, or if he ever really had. The next morning, a hospital social worker came by. Her name was Elena, and she was gentle in the way trained professionals are. Warm enough to seem sincere, but distant enough to avoid absorbing your pain. She asked questions. Did I feel safe at home? Did I have access to my medication? Was anyone helping me manage finances? I hesitated. Then, for the first time, I told the full truth. About the pills, the stolen prescriptions, the forged documents, the fall. She listened without interruption, took notes, and asked if I would consent to a wellness investigation. I nodded. She left the room, promising someone would follow up. Later that day, a man from Adult Protective Services came by. He was calm, professional, and less sympathetic than Elena. He explained how these cases typically went. If there was sufficient suspicion of financial exploitation or neglect, they could pursue legal restrictions. Temporary guardianship could be requested. In some cases, elder abuse charges were filed. He asked for names. I gave him my son's full name, birth date, and described his appearance. Then I asked a question that had been burning in my throat. If my son forged power of attorney, can I reverse it? He looked up from his notepad. If we can prove it was done under duress or deceit, yes, you'll need an attorney. I nodded. That night, alone in the hospital room, I made my decision. I wasn't going back to that house. Not while Teddy was in it. Not until every tie was cut. Whatever sense of duty or guilt I had been clinging to, the last withered threads of fatherly instinct, had finally snapped. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a man with nothing left to lose. 3 days later, I was discharged. Sheila picked me up. I asked her to take me not home, but to the downtown branch of my bank. I requested a meeting with the branch manager. Eleanor, a woman I'd known peripherally for years, always polite, efficient, ushered me into her office. I told her what had happened. I asked if there had been any recent activity on my accounts, any changes in access permissions, any unusual transfers. Her face tightened as she read the screen. There had been a request just 3 days prior to add Teddy as an authorized user on one of my savings accounts. The request was denied, pending verification, but it was there. He had tried. I signed documents revoking all previous permissions. We initiated a fraud alert. I ordered a freeze on outgoing funds, set up two-step authentication, and moved my most substantial savings into a new account under a different name. I asked for copies of every form Teddy had submitted. Then I called Martin, the lawyer who'd helped Lorraine and me draft our will years ago. He agreed to see me that afternoon. Martin looked older than I remembered, but his mind was still sharp. I told him everything. The pills, the fall, the forged forms. He listened, asked precise questions, and finally said, if he forged power of attorney, we can challenge it, but we'll need evidence, and fast. What if he's already used it to access other things? Then we pursue civil action. What about criminal? He sighed. You'll need APS and the police to cooperate. But yes, it's possible. I leaned back in the chair and looked out the window. The sun was low, and the shadows on the street were long. My son had tried to sell my life, one prescription bottle at a time. He had tried to erase my authority, reduce me to a signature on a form, a fading memory in a house he treated like a warehouse. But I wasn't gone yet. Not by a long shot. And I would make sure he understood that. I didn't return home right away. I stayed in a motel on the edge of town, the kind with faded carpets, humming air conditioners, and laminated menus for nearby pizza joints slid under the door every evening. It wasn't much, but it was clean, anonymous, and, most importantly, mine. There was something almost sacred about sliding the chain lock closed at night, knowing no one was skulking in the basement, waiting to strip me of my rights in my sleep. From that stale-smelling room, I began orchestrating the dismantling of everything Teddy had built on my name. The morning after I met with Martin, we filed paperwork challenging the validity of the power of attorney documents. Martin submitted affidavits claiming manipulation, misrepresentation, and medical vulnerability at the time of signing. He added that I had no recollection of being informed about the true contents of the forms Teddy had me sign, and given the circumstances of prescription theft and suspected financial exploitation, we requested an emergency suspension of the document's validity. The court agreed to a temporary freeze on all actions under that power of attorney pending further investigation. It wasn't full victory, not yet, but it was a critical halt. Meanwhile, the detective assigned to my case finally called. His name was Owen Cassidy, and from the way he spoke, calm, patient, direct, I could tell this wasn't his first family betrayal. I walked him through everything again, the missing medications, the envelopes, the forged forms, the delivery man who'd come to my house, the fall. I gave him the names of the pharmacists I'd spoken to, the doctor who had treated me in the ER, the social worker. He took it all down and said they would be issuing a warrant to inspect Teddy's devices, his room, his browser history. It wouldn't be fast, he warned, but it would move forward. While that slow legal machine began to stir, something else happened. Something I hadn't expected. One evening, just after 8 p.m., I received a message on Facebook Messenger. I hadn't used that account in years. It was from someone named Lauren. I stared at the name for several seconds, confused. Then it clicked. Lauren was Teddy's daughter, my granddaughter, from his first marriage. I hadn't seen her since she was 9 years old. She was 19 now. "Hi, Grandpa. I know this is weird, but I wanted to talk to you. Is this okay?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A knot tightened in my chest. I typed back, "Hello, Lauren. Yes, it's okay. I'm glad to hear from you," she replied quickly. "I heard some stuff about Dad, about what he did to you. I'm really sorry. I had no idea. I stopped talking to him a while ago. I asked her how she'd found me. She said she'd seen my name mentioned on a subreddit about elder abuse and financial exploitation. Someone had posted anonymously, but the details were unmistakably ours. A friend of hers who studied social work had shared it with her, thinking it might be her family. She was right. I told her I was okay, that I was staying somewhere safe, and that it meant the world to me that she reached out. We talked for over an hour. She told me about college. She was studying psychology, wanted to work with vulnerable youth. She hadn't lived with Teddy since she was 16. Her mom had remarried, and Lauren had moved on with her life. But she remembered me. She remembered how I used to take her to the park, how I showed her how to do jigsaw puzzles, how I made pancakes in funny shapes. She said I was the only one who ever felt like a real grown-up in her life. After we ended the call, I sat there for a long time staring at the screen. My son had tried to erase me, had tried to reduce me to a shell, but the memory of who I had been, of what I had given, it lived on, in her. That was the first good thing that had happened in months. But the war wasn't over. 1 week after the freeze on the power of attorney was enacted, Martin called me with news. Teddy had attempted to empty one of the joint accounts, one I had completely forgotten about. It was an old account Lorraine and I had opened decades ago for college savings. I hadn't touched it in years. Teddy had apparently rediscovered it and submitted withdrawal forms claiming I was incapacitated. But thanks to the alert on my records, the request had been denied and flagged. I was livid. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was strategy. My son had become a predator with a spreadsheet. He was combing through every financial corner of my life looking for soft spots. And I knew then, with searing clarity, that it wasn't going to stop until one of us was legally, or literally, out of the way. That Sunday, I returned to the house. I didn't tell Teddy. I waited until I knew he would be out, probably picking up supplies or making another deal. I had the locksmith meet me at 2 p.m. We changed every lock on the house. Front door, back, garage. I installed cameras in the entryway, living room, kitchen. I packed everything I truly needed. Important documents, my computer, a few changes of clothes, the photo album Lorraine had made for our 40th anniversary. The rest I left. Let him have the couch, the dishes, the ancient recliner. They were just things. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was evidence. Before I left, I posted a printed notice on the basement door. Teddy, per emergency court order and revocation of power of attorney, you are no longer authorized to use this residence as a domicile. You have 72 hours to vacate. Any entry after that will be treated as unlawful trespass. R.K. I took a photo of the note, locked the front door behind me, and didn't look back. Later that evening, Martin informed me that we could initiate a restraining order if needed. I told him to begin the process. Within 48 hours, a judge signed off on a temporary order preventing Teddy from entering my property, accessing my accounts, or contacting me directly. It would be reviewed in court 2 weeks later for permanence. Then, 2 nights later, Teddy poisoned himself. It wasn't intentional, at least not by the official report. A call came from Cassidy, the detective. Teddy had been found semi-conscious in a motel in York, about 30 miles from Lancaster. Someone had called 911 after he collapsed outside a gas station, vomiting blood. At the hospital, they discovered he'd ingested a combination of medications, opioids, sedatives, and insulin, not prescribed to him. Likely, he'd been sorting his inventory and accidentally taken a mix meant for someone else. He was in the ICU, stable but comatose. They didn't know yet if he had suffered permanent damage. Cassidy paused, then asked, "Would you like to be notified if his condition changes?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Yes, but I'm not coming." That night I sat by the window of the motel room and stared at the neon sign of a nearby diner flickering like a broken heartbeat. My son had stolen from me, humiliated me, endangered me, tried to erase me. And now he'd finally reached the edge of the same hole he'd spent years digging. There was no victory in it, no satisfaction, only a terrible, hollow ache where love used to be. But the truth was now undeniable. The threat was broken. Whatever came next, court, restitution, apology, or silence, I would no longer be afraid. I had survived, and I wasn't going to let him write the last chapter. I didn't intend to visit the hospital. In fact, I spent the better part of the week deliberately staying busy, meeting with Martin about the civil case, filling out paperwork to formalize the revocation of all joint authorizations, speaking with Cassidy again about the potential for criminal charges against Teddy. The more concrete steps I took, the more stable I felt. After months of confusion, of being gaslit and second-guessed, I was finally regaining the basic dignity of deciding what happened to me, what belonged to me, what I would and would not allow. But despite all that forward motion, despite every signed form and severed legal tie, there was a part of me, quiet, persistent, that kept circling the thought of him lying in that hospital bed, maybe dying, maybe already beyond repair. And eventually, it wore me down. I arrived just after 4 p.m. The nurse at the front desk of the ICU recognized the name I gave and hesitated before checking the screen. "Are you family?" she asked. "I'm his father," I replied. Her face softened. She gestured down the hallway. "Room 211. He's stable now, but sedated. We're still monitoring his kidney function. Toxicology came back 2 days ago. Combination of oxycodone, clonazepam, and insulin. It's a miracle he didn't code on the scene. I nodded, thanked her, and made my way down the corridor, my shoes whispering against the waxed floor. The air was thick with antiseptic and silence. The room was dim, lit only by a single fluorescent strip above the bed. Teddy lay motionless, tubes in both arms, his skin sallow and waxy, the kind of color I'd only ever seen in Lorraine the last 24 hours of her life. His mouth hung slightly open, and he looked, for the first time since he was a boy, vulnerable. I stepped into the room, closed the door behind me, and sat in the vinyl chair near the foot of the bed. There were no flowers, no cards, no visitors. I was the only person who had come, and I had no idea why. I studied his face. Not the man I'd come to dread sharing a home with, but the remnants of the boy I used to lift onto my shoulders, the boy who once cried when I missed his school play, the boy who called me Daddy when he was afraid of thunder. Somewhere along the line, that boy had turned inward, hardened, decayed into the man before me. Deceitful, bitter, empty. And yet as I sat there, I couldn't bring myself to feel hatred. Not quite. Not anymore. What I felt instead was something murkier. Exhaustion, grief, and a kind of clarity I hadn't had before. I spoke, though I didn't know if he could hear me. You almost killed yourself, you know. Not just me, not just through what you did to me, but this stupid, reckless desperation you called survival. His eyelids didn't twitch. Machines beeped softly. I went on. You used to ask me when you were little, what happens after people die? I told you what my father told me. That people live in the memories of the ones who love them, that as long as someone remembers your voice, your laugh, your way of walking, you're not really gone. But I lied. People can be erased, not just by death. By choice, by cruelty, by selfishness so loud it drowns out everything else they ever were. I paused, my mouth dry. You tried to erase me. With every stolen pill, every forged paper, every time you called me forgetful or paranoid, you tried to bury who I was. I let it happen. For a while. Because I thought that was what fathers did. But I'm not that man anymore. And you don't get to define me. Not now. Not ever again. I stood and walked to the edge of the bed. When you wake up, if you wake up, you'll be in a different world. No house. No access. No more hiding behind my name. Whatever you do next, wherever you end up, it'll be without me. Because the only thing I can offer you now is absence, and the only thing I owe myself is peace. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But I felt oddly light, as if some heavy and rusted hook had finally dislodged itself from my chest. I reached out once, just once, and touched his forehead. It was warm, alive. I turned and left without looking back. Outside the hospital, the sky had shifted. The sun was going down behind a veil of clouds, and the wind carried the scent of early rain. I walked slowly to the bus stop. Not because I was tired, but because there was no reason to rush anymore. The war was over. He'd lost, and I had walked away intact, scarred, older, lonelier, but whole. When I returned to the motel, there was a message from Martin waiting. The court had approved permanent revocation of the power of attorney. Teddy's attempt to declare me legally incapacitated had been formally rejected after the results of the independent psychiatric evaluation came in. Solid, unequivocal, and damning for his case. Cassidy had also moved the investigation forward. There would likely be charges: distribution of prescription drugs, identity fraud, elder abuse. Whether or not they would pursue them while Teddy lay recovering was another matter. But the wheels had turned. A day later, I received a certified letter at the motel. It was from the hospital's patient advocate. A copy of a request Teddy had filed before falling unconscious, asking to have me barred from visiting him. He'd submitted it the day after the police contacted him for the first time. A preemptive strike, I supposed. The hospital didn't act on it, as it came into conflict with my listed emergency contact status. But still, reading it, seeing his signature, was a cold little slap of irony. I folded the paper, placed it in my folder marked Legal, and filed it away with everything else. It no longer surprised me, and it didn't hurt. Not really. Because the truth was, I had already said goodbye. Not just to Teddy, to the version of me who believed love could survive betrayal, to the part of me that waited endlessly for an apology that was never coming, to the illusion that family, by virtue of blood alone, deserved anything from me. I had survived. He had not. That was the only story left to tell. 3 months later, I sat behind a folding table in the back office of a small church off King Street, sorting plastic pill boxes for the Tuesday medication support group. It was volunteer work. Unofficial, informal. Something Sheila had pulled me into after hearing me mutter too many times that I needed to stay busy. Most of the people who came through weren't much younger than me. Widows, veterans, retirees on fixed incomes, all of them juggling prescriptions, appointments, and the exhausting bureaucracy of surviving past 70 in a world that treats age like a malfunction. I didn't say much. I measured doses, checked expiration dates, made sure no one went home with the wrong statin or blood thinner. It was simple work, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: use. My case with Teddy had settled quietly. The court affirmed the permanent restraining order. Charges had been filed but were suspended due to his medical condition. He'd suffered partial kidney failure, now required dialysis 3 times a week, and was being transferred to a long-term care facility in Reading. No criminal conviction, but no more access to my name, my money, my home. He had become a patient number in someone else's system now. I had stopped checking for updates. I moved into a senior apartment complex just outside Lancaster. Not a nursing home, not assisted living, just a simple 1-bedroom space with wide door frames and grab bars in the shower. It was modest but clean, and nobody smoked indoors or played loud music past 9 p.m. I bought new furniture, donated most of what I had left from the house. A fresh start, empty of ghosts. The kitchen smelled like lemons now instead of mildew and resentment. Lauren visited twice. Once in April, again in June. She brought me a lemon tart she baked herself, showed me pictures of her campus, even helped me set up email alerts for pharmacy refills. She never mentioned her father. I never asked. We talked about books, recipes, and once, quietly, cautiously, about forgiveness. She said she didn't know if she could forgive what he'd done to her mother, to me. I told her forgiveness wasn't a gate you walked through. It was a hill you had to keep climbing, even when it felt like there'd never be a top. I didn't want revenge. That part of me had died somewhere between the courtroom and the ICU. What I wanted now was something simpler. I wanted a quiet cup of coffee in the morning. I wanted to know that when I turned the key in my front door, no one was inside using my name like a password to access the black market. I wanted to feel like I mattered to someone who hadn't yet taken everything I had to give. One afternoon, as I sat in my armchair listening to an old jazz station on the radio Lorraine once loved, I realized something that stopped me cold. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't afraid to die. Not because I was ready, but because I was finally, quietly, alive.